Inside a darkened operations room, elite warriors listened to a woman's voice crack with desperation. Jessica Buchanan, an American aid worker, was dying in the Somali wasteland, her body ravaged by infection, her captors armed and ruthless. The mission parameters read like a suicide call, but the SEAL Team 6 strapped on their parachutes and prepared to jump into hell itself. The October sun beat down mercilessly on the Somali landscape as Jessica Buchanan prepared for what should have been a routine trip. At 32, the Ohio-born educator had found her calling far from home, teaching African children how to identify and avoid the deadly landmines that littered their war-scarred homeland. Working alongside Pol Thisted, a 60-year-old Danish humanitarian, Jessica had grown accustomed to the calculated risks of operating in one of Earth's most volatile regions. Their employer, a prominent aid organization, had sent them deep into southern Somalia for a demining education program. The location sat perilously near what locals called the Green Line, the invisible boundary separating relatively stable territory from zones controlled by Islamic extremists. Tribal warfare, suicide bombings, roadside ambushes. These were the daily realities of Somalia in 2011. But Jessica hadn't traveled halfway around the world to cower behind fortified walls. The children needed education. The mission would proceed. October 25, 2011, dawned like any other day, ended like no other. Something felt wrong the moment Jessica approached the waiting Land Cruiser. Their regular driver was missing. In his place sat an unfamiliar face, a man who avoided eye contact and gripped the steering wheel with visible tension. Jessica's instincts screamed danger, but Pol was already settling into the passenger seat, anxious to complete the journey home. She climbed in, a decision that would cost her 3 months of her life. 10 minutes into the drive, the world exploded into violence. A pursuing vehicle roared up behind them, engine screaming, before swerving alongside and forcing their convoy to a complete stop. Just when the doors burst open, nearly 3 dozen armed men poured out like angry hornets, their AK-47 rifles glinting in the harsh sunlight. Jessica felt the cold kiss of gunmetal against her skull before her mind could process what was happening. Their voices shouted in unfamiliar languages. Their security escort was ripped from the vehicle and thrown to the dirt like a discarded toy. A new passenger, heavily armed and clearly in command, slid into the empty seat. The driver needed no instructions. He accelerated hard, revealing his true allegiance. The entire operation had been compromised from the start. What followed was a nightmare of constant motion. They changed vehicles, faces, and added more weapons. The kidnappers were high on cat, a regional stimulant that left them twitchy, unpredictable, and dangerous. One man rifled through Jessica's belongings with manic energy, giggling as he examined, then discarded her personal items. Hours later, somewhere in the vast Somali desert, the vehicles finally stopped. Armed men ordered Jessica and Pol out. They were made to walk into the darkness. Jessica thought this is how it ends for her, certain she was being led to her execution. She dropped to her knees, back turned to her captors, waiting for the inevitable. Instead, she heard a single word: sleep. The pirates' ransom demand was staggering: $45 million for 2 humanitarian workers. Jessica's heart sank. She was certain she'd been handed a death sentence. But 10,000 miles away, events were already in motion that would prove her wrong. Within hours of the abduction, Jessica's organization had contacted the American embassy in Nairobi. The embassy notified the FBI. The FBI briefed senior government officials. Before nightfall, the intelligence had reached the Oval Office. President Barack Obama received the news with characteristic calm, then issued a simple directive: monitor the situation closely. Jessica Buchanan was now a priority. As Pol would later observe, being kidnapped alongside an American was the luckiest break of his life. The pirates would soon learn what that meant. The days blurred into weeks, weeks stretched into months. Jessica and Pol were constantly relocated, dragged from one desert camp to another, sleeping on bare ground under the merciless Somali sun. Daytime temperatures soared past 100 degrees. Nights brought bone-chilling cold. Water was scarce and often contaminated. Food was minimal. But the physical hardships paled compared to the psychological warfare. "Do you want to die today?" the pirates would ask repeatedly, savoring their power over the defenseless captives. Jessica fought back the only way she could with her mind. She invented a fictional son, giving him her dog's name, because in Somali culture, mothers commanded respect. If her captors believed she had a child waiting for her, they might think twice before pulling the trigger. She observed everything: guard rotations, leadership hierarchies, who was drugged, who was violent, who showed flickers of humanity. Information was power, even in captivity. Negotiations dragged on. The pirates refused a $1.5 million counteroffer, enough money to set each kidnapper up for life. They grew increasingly volatile, threatening to sell their American prize to al-Shabaab terrorists for an estimated $5 million. Then, in January 2012, Jessica's body began to fail. Unsanitary conditions and contaminated water led to a urinary tract infection. Without treatment, it spread to Jessica's kidneys. In the Somali desert, miles from medical care, a kidney infection was a death sentence, slow, agonizing, and certain. Jessica could barely stand. The pain was excruciating. When her captors finally allowed her to speak with negotiators, her voice trembled with fear and exhaustion. Meanwhile, the FBI was monitoring that call. Within an hour, the intelligence reached Washington. Medical experts were consulted. The prognosis was grim: days, perhaps 2 weeks maximum. The decision point had arrived. President Obama reviewed the situation. An American citizen was dying in hostile territory. Ransom negotiations had failed. Time had run out. The mission went to SEAL Team 6, the elite unit that had eliminated Osama bin Laden just months earlier. If anyone could pull off an impossible rescue, it was them. Across America, 24 cell phones buzzed simultaneously. The men who answered came in all shapes, some built like grizzly bears, others lean as distance runners. But they shared an unmistakable quality: absolute confidence forged through years of operating in the world's most dangerous places. They were Blue Squadron, SEAL Team 6. They had just been activated for a hostage rescue. For weeks, they trained relentlessly: hostage extraction drills, live fire exercises, mission rehearsals. They studied satellite imagery of the pirate camp. They watched Jessica's proof of life video until her terrified face was burned into their memories. These men had hunted terrorists across multiple continents. They'd operated in every hellhole imaginable. But missions involving women and children carried special weight. The motivation was personal. January 25, 2012 was selected as Extraction Day. No moon meant maximum darkness, the SEAL's greatest advantage. At the American military base in Djibouti, 500 miles from the target, preparations reached a fever pitch. Equipment was staged, helicopters were fueled, medical teams stood ready. The operations cost had already exceeded $100 million. Some might question spending double the ransom demand, but the calculation was strategic. Pay once, and every American abroad becomes a target. Demonstrate overwhelming force, and kidnappers think twice. With final checks complete, the SEALs boarded a C-130 Hercules transport. The pilots themselves, exhausted from a 9-hour flight earlier that day, flew 3 more hours into hostile airspace. Luck cut both ways that night. Unknown to the SEALs, the pirates had planned to relocate their camp on January 25th, but an outbreak of food poisoning from spoiled meat forced them to remain in place. A massive solar storm erupted, its electromagnetic pulse so powerful it disrupted Earth's magnetic field. Radio communications became unreliable or impossible. In a worst-case scenario, the SEALs would have no contact with command, no quick reaction force, no air support. Meteorologists reported sustained speeds of 40 knots, more than twice the threshold that would normally scrub a jump. Attempting a parachute insertion in such conditions bordered on suicidal. For any normal mission, the answer would be immediate: abort and reschedule. But Jessica Buchanan didn't have time for normal. Her kidneys were failing. She only had days or maybe hours to live. Every SEAL aboard that aircraft faced the same choice: jump into conditions that could kill them, or let an American die in the desert. 3 hours into the flight, the C-130's cargo ramp yawned open. The SEALs rose as one, checking parachutes and oxygen systems with practiced efficiency. Outside, 20,000 feet of darkness waited. One by one, they stepped into the void, free fall, Wind screaming past at 40 knots, bodies accelerating to 120 miles per hour, then the violent snap of parachutes deploying, followed by the controlled descent into an invisible landing zone. The hurricane-force winds scattered the team, dragging some operators hundreds of yards across the desert floor. But SEALs are nothing if not adaptable. Within minutes, all 24 had regrouped, shed their jump gear, and donned combat equipment. Now came the march, several miles through 100-degree heat, moving in absolute silence. The operators changed direction frequently, always keeping the wind in their faces to prevent sounds and scents from drifting toward the target. After nearly an hour, they reached their final position, 500 meters from the pirate encampment. Justin Sheffield, a veteran operator, took point. His hand signals were precise. Half the team peeled left, half went right. Snipers established overwatch positions on the flanks, their thermal scopes painting the camp in shades of heat signature. The SEALs moved with supernatural patience. 1 foot forward, weight transfer, pause, repeat. Each step brought them closer to the pirates, closer to Jessica, and closer to the moment when silence would erupt into violence. Inside the camp, Jessica lay on her thin mat with her body racked with fever and pain. She'd been praying desperately to God, to her deceased mother, to anyone who might listen. Then she heard it, a faint sound in the darkness, scratching, movement. The next moment, the night exploded. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Pirates grabbed their weapons and fired blindly into the darkness, their panicked shots illuminating the camp in stuttering muzzle flashes. SEAL snipers responded with surgical precision, dropping the machine gunners before they could bring their heavy weapons to bear. The remaining SEALs advanced in perfect formation, their movements coordinated through years of training. Sheffield spotted the primary objective, Jessica, crouched on the ground between 2 pirates with rifles pointed at her head. He and another operator broke formation, closing the distance in seconds. 2 suppressed shots and both pirates dropped. Sheffield threw himself over Jessica as the firefight continued around them, his armored body creating a human shield. More SEALs piled on, layers of America's finest warriors willing to die for a teacher they'd never met. 9 pirates lay dead. 2 hostages were alive, 0 American casualties. Sheffield hoisted Jessica onto his shoulders and ran pure adrenaline-fueled sprint away from the decimated camp. Other SEALs formed a protective cocoon, weapons trained outward, ready to engage any threat. The march to the extraction point was tense but uneventful. Every suspicious sound brought an immediate response, SEALs surrounding Jessica with their bodies, creating an impenetrable human fortress. Then, rising from the darkness like salvation itself, came the distinctive sound of rotor blades. The Black Hawk helicopter. Jessica ran. Despite the infection, despite 3 months of captivity, despite everything, she ran toward that aircraft like her life depended on it. Because it did. As the helicopter lifted off, Somalia falling away beneath them, Jessica finally allowed herself to breathe. The rescue of Jessica Buchanan sent shockwaves through terrorist and criminal networks worldwide. The message was unmistakable. America doesn't negotiate with hostage takers. America sends its most elite warriors regardless of cost, regardless of risk, regardless of conditions that should make success impossible. SEAL Team 6 had parachuted through a solar storm and gale force winds. They'd marched through desert heat and infiltrated a heavily defended position in total darkness. They'd executed a flawless assault against 9 armed pirates and extracted 2 hostages without a single American casualty. Make sure you like and subscribe to get more videos like this.